So, hi, Steve.
Hey Mel, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
It feels like it's all gone in a real blip, actually. Well, even though everything was slow with me this year, it just feels like it's passed in a blip. How was yours?
Um, has it been and gone already? The last year for me is just gone in such a flash. I sort of remember we were talking about whether to put the tree up, and it's still up, and other people have taken theirs down. So I've sort of lost all sort of perceptions of time at the moment, because it's you never know where the bins are going to be emptied, the trees coming up, coming down. I've got no idea at the moment, but yeah, it was all right. Apart from we had one of our family members, my other half's mum. She was been in hospital all over Christmas and New Year, so
Oh,
yeah, poor
yeah.
lady.
So
But
it's
she's okay.
yeah, but it's that mix. Sorry to hear that, but sometimes it's that mix, isn't it, of challenging, difficult things because you've got close family members and you worry about them, as well as, we're celebrating and moving towards the new year. And I don't know about you, I do love New Year's. I don't like so much moving into the October, November months, but I think that sort of takes us nicely, really, is that as part of the new series that I'm doing of bridging psychology and spirituality, is really starting to look at, in a deeper way, our health and well-being, but primarily well-being, which can encompass mental health. It can encompass health, as you know. And part of that is really looking at different types of practice, holistic practice, different ways that people work that support people. So we met, I think, about 2011 through Meetup, which was quite new back then, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. There was somebody put together a group, a social group, and on Meetup, and I just happened to sort of come across it. I can't even remember how now. And I met you on a walk, and there was a few other people, and
That's
we just
right.
started chatting because we had a lot in common with regards to the different therapeutic aspects of stuff. Yeah, so that was probably about 2011. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I did go on to run a Meetup group, and I think all throughout my life, and I think when we spoke as well, is I've always been mindful about not only the work that I do, but how do I support myself and my own well-being, and continue to support people, because it's a balance, isn't it? And I think Meetup for me was a way of socializing after being quite academic and looking after the kids, and it was great to meet like-minded people. So I think for the first few minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it takes, it'd be really good to find out a bit about you and your background and what led you to do what you do, because I know you do a range of different modalities, and anyone who's listening today, it'd be great to have you back on again, because I think you cover so much and they're all quite distinct and different. And what I'd like people to hear about is your journey, what gets us thinking about the work that we do, but also people that you come into contact with, and the difference in those approaches and what you've noticed, because I'm trained in several psychotherapeutic approaches, and some are great with some people and others are great with some people, and I haven't got a particular one, but I know from the research different things can work better, say like with anxiety, depression, things like that. So that being said, welcome, Steve, and tell us a little bit about you, your journey, and what you've been up to.
So I've been a therapist pretty much full-time since the very, very early 2000s, 2001, 2002, something like that. But it all started for me probably around about 1994, 95. I was working for an airline, and I had been promoted to become a supervisor, a duty manager, if you like, of a group of specialists who look after famous people, I suppose is the easiest way to explain it. So these people were the most professional customer service agents in the airline. And I, as being ex-cabin crew and check-in staff, this, that, and the other, I just assumed that just being nice to people that were working for you would get the job done. But I suddenly realised that, it comes sometimes it can come across as being a bit weak when you're being nice to people all the time. So, and I suddenly realized that I was lacking in skills of assertiveness. And a friend of mine who was staying with me at the time was telling me about this American chap that he was reading a book about called Anthony Robbins. Now, I'd never heard of Anthony Robbins at this point. And he kept on trying to throw this book down my throat by Anthony Robbins called Unlimited Power. And the more he kept on saying, you've got to read this book, the more I was like, you're blooming just trying to brainwash me. And I was resisting every opportunity, thinking, no, I'm not. Don't try and throw stuff at me. And anyway, one day he was out and I noticed that the book was just sat there on the side. And I thought, well, if I have a quick peek inside the first few pages, he won't know. Then I won't have to sort of pretend I'm resisting. Anyway, I started reading it. Oh, my goodness. It was amazing. What an amazing book. So, and it sort of opened my eyes into the basics of how you can persuade people and motivate people in a congruent way. So I was absolutely over the moon that I'd discovered somebody that could share something with me in this book that would help me at work to become a better manager. So it turned out that one of my friends was also going on an Anthony Robbins course, face-to-face one. I don't know if it was, it might have been at Wembley or the NEC, but anyway, in 1995, it was called Unleash the Power Within Weekend. So I went, and on the first night, excuse me, on the first night of the 4-day course, one of the things they get you to do is to walk on fire. 2,000-degree hot burning coals barefoot. And because friends of mine had done it the year before, and they all said it was just fantastic, this, that, and the other, I thought, right, I'll be doing this. And I turned up, and then I noticed about 15 minutes before we were about to go out, there were thousands of people at this event. And about 15 minutes before we were due to go out, and he kept on saying, okay, right, we're getting ready to go out. And then I suddenly realized I was terrified that I was going to trip over, go up in a ball of flame and die a horrible, painful death. You know, it was so vivid in my head. I was thinking to myself, what the heck am I trying to do? Walk on fire? Am I mad? And but this is the power of Anthony Robbins. He said at the time, he said, ladies and gentlemen, just need some quiet. My assistants are individuals here in the group, and those 3 individuals look like they're having a bit of a problem, and they look like they're a bit worried. And he said, and I just want to talk to those 3. I thought, well, I'm definitely one of them. So I was all ears, thinking, right, I need to listen to what he's got to say. Knowing what he's said then, now I realize it was probably only 3 people that didn't have a problem with it. I think that thousands of people did, but I just assumed I was one of the only 3 people that had a problem with it. And he said, look, you know, firstly, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And I thought, oh, relief. I don't have to do it if I don't want to. He said, however, what I'd like to offer you is the opportunity to help the other people around you. And to do that, if you want to, is to take your shoes and socks off, roll your trouser legs up, and just pretend to the people around you that you're going to do it. And that way you won't be putting them off if they're wavering. I thought, I can do that. I can do that because I like helping people. So that was it. Shoes and socks were off, trouser legs rolled up. And I thought, right, I'm just going to pretend to everybody that I'm going to do it, because I know I don't have to do it. So, but I can pretend that I'm going to do it because I know that's going to be helpful. So I went along with everything. You know, he was saying, you know, we have to walk along in all together. We have to walk in time, and we have to have our eyes above the horizon level, and we have to keep chanting, cool, wet moss, cool, wet moss, cool, wet moss. So we were all walking along, all in line like soldiers. We're all walking in time saying, cool, wet moss. And I kept on geeing everyone else up. Come on, we're going to do this. You're going to be brilliant. Come on. Got out to where the queue was, and I could feel from about 20 feet away, even 100 feet away, really, I could feel this wave of heat like the sun. It was that hot. This 2,000 degrees was like nearly making my skin blister on my face. It was so hot. But I thought, it doesn't matter. because I know these people want to do it and I'm just helping them. I'm not going to put them off, because if I put them off, I might cause them harm. So I was desperate not to cause them harm. I was desperate to make sure they had all the support they needed. So I kept on saying to them, come on, we can do this. Cool, wet moss. Got nearer and nearer to the front of the queue. And then there was one person in front of me, and they tapped him on the shoulder, and then he just started marching across. And there were sparks flying up from his feet. And I thought, blimey, that looks hot. Cool, wet moss. Cool, wet moss. And all of a sudden, they tapped me on the shoulder. And in my head, I'm thinking, right, I'm turning that way and walking off. I don't want to do it. But my body just went straight across. I was walking across. I was halfway across the fire. And all of a sudden, I went, go wet moss. Go wet moss. Got to the other side, and I thought, how did that work? My feet didn't catch fire. And then when we went back in, he said, I just want to say, I haven't really taught you how to walk on fire. He said, teaching you how to walk on fire is very easy. What I've taught you is how to do something you thought was absolutely impossible.
Wow.
Thought, oh my goodness. And he said, now what other things in your life which are nowhere near as difficult to do as what you've just done, how else can you transform your life by thinking those things are now possible? And I thought, like he said, you know, if you wanted to ask a raise or ask somebody out on a date, and I thought, oh my goodness, yeah, I can do anything. So that was a really good metaphor, a physical metaphor for how you sort of look at all sorts of obstacles as being impossible, but actually they're really not, like walking on fire. So, excuse me, yeah, so it was an amazing weekend, and that, if you like, transformed my whole life, because he said, the tools and techniques that I'm sharing with you this weekend were, they come from a technique called neuro-linguistic programming. And so, of course, from that point onwards, that was the beginning of my journey, really. And I went off and did all the NLP courses that I could find, you know, foundation courses, practitioner courses, master practitioner courses, even NLP trainer courses. And it sort of gave me a set of tools that enabled me all the while, whilst I was working for the airline, to become a much better manager. Right. Becoming more adaptable, becoming more flexible, but becoming more assertive with it and far more respected. And I kept getting promoted at work. So it was obviously, proof was in the pudding. So that's pretty much how it all started. And if I look back at all the things that I've learned in this last 25, 30 years, you know, since that happened, 23 years or whatever, I think NLP was for me the best foundational skill that I could learn, because it enabled me to have a structure of how pretty much any therapy you want to use works, whether that's a psychological one, whether it's a physical one, whether it's something to do with manifestation, whether it's something to do with spirituality. All of it has got to have a structure, and NLP gave me an understanding of how structure works within any language, whether that's to self or to others, this and the other. So that, yeah, that's pretty much how I started.
So just winding back a little bit after that amazing moment that you had, which must have been fairly mind-blowing at the time, and you know, you leave there approaching your whole life in a different way. You talked about how it really made a difference at work. Had you noticed anything else outside of that? Because I think if anybody goes and sees an NLP practitioner, a lot of people still only think it's used in business, or it's tagged on with coaching, or you know, some of the processes are only used in sales. And as you know, I think it was about the same time, actually. I think mine was about 2003 when I did the practitioner training. I've done that twice because I loved it so much the first time. I wanted to be, sometimes when you layer the information, you get a much deeper understanding of that. So did you notice anything else happening around that time, or was it, is it a steady process?
I noticed also in my personal life, there were at that time, I was going through some enormous challenges, because not only was I professionally doing better at work, I was also personally going through some big challenges, because I was also, at that time, I was a special constable, for Thames Valley Police, and a friend of mine had been arrested for something, and he just put two and two together and assumed, because I was a special constable and he'd been arrested, that I had something to do with it, which wasn't the case at all. However, another friend of mine who was friends with both of us, he said, I just want to let you know that so-and-so thinks that it's you that's caused him to be arrested. Now, without all my NLP training, this, that, and the other, I probably would have first been devastated. And secondly, I would have probably been protesting my innocence and possibly even getting upset and annoyed about it and all those things. Whereas on this occasion, when he said that, although it was a big shock to me, because I had nothing to do with, it purely was a coincidence that he'd been arrested for what he had been arrested for, totally separately to me being a special constable. And but the very first thing I thought was, well, I can understand why he thinks it's me. So I was putting myself in his shoes to try and understand the problem from his point of view, so I could try to see if there was something that I could understand which he hadn't. But that was probably the first time I realized that it had allowed me to, having those skills of NLP, had allowed me to sort of grow up, because I wasn't acting in an infantile manner like I might have done otherwise. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't doing any of that. I was like, well, this is actually quite interesting how he's come to the conclusion that he thinks it's me when, well, it isn't me, but I'm trying to understand it from his point of view. And I think, coupled with my experience doing the Anthony Robbins weekend and all the NLP, this and the other, I suddenly realized that I'd grown up. I was acting like a proper adult now, not an emotional person. I was actually looking at it purely unemotionally, but connecting to his emotions, so I could understand empathically how it must be for him, and is there something that I can say or do that would help him to deal with what he was going through. So that was a big journey. That was a big eye-opener for me back then.
There's two things that come to mind with that and I think I'd like to unwrap the idea of what NLP actually is and does. Is part of NLP is really, like you say, it's understanding the structure, but it's like the structure of who we are as human beings, how we function, isn't it? How our brains work, how we take it, how we perceive the world, and what information becomes available to us. And I certainly know in the early days for me, I'd already done 4 years of therapy training and was now able to practice with people. But there was something about that didn't sit with me. I felt like I was missing another half of how you can practice. Like, it's all very well knowing that something's upset you and it's come from the past, and a lot of things go back to parenting or things that happened to you as a child. But then I kept on thinking, well, so what? And with the NLP, it was, and as you were talking, it reminded me of the phrase, the map is not the territory. And that was something that we were taught really early on in NLP. And I've got my map and way of looking at the world, and the way that we look at the world often is actually outside of our conscious awareness. We just do what we do until we come up against an obstacle, and then we are really got to sit down and either blame other people or look internally, or step out of that, as you say, step into the adult, which then reminded me of Eric Burns' model, parent, adult, child. And often when we go into stressful modes, we go back to that child whose needs haven't been met, or there's something that it has been activated that was similar to something else before, because that could have been a pattern for you. But what was fascinating with NLP that really blew my mind for the first year was every process I did, what I learned, and how to work with somebody in a sort of coaching, facilitated, therapeutic engagement, an hour with somebody, was how quickly someone could shift beyond what they were able to comprehend. You could see the physiological changes. You could see you hear a difference in the way that they spoke. And that's why it was interesting to say, what did you notice? Because when we were working with clients, they could come in and say, this is my problem, that's my problem, that's my problem. And I think the founders of NLP used to say, well, someone tells you what the problem is, you kind of know what the solution is, you kind of know what you're working with. And it's how something like 180-degree turnaround can have a huge impact. And yours was really quite fast, wasn't it, to go from reacting as a child to then responding and sitting back and not getting caught in the emotions, in getting overwhelmed or having to really do a process on yourself, was just really being able to go, okay, what's their map of the world look like? I wonder how they come to that. For me,
it was, I think probably one of the things that made the biggest difference in the shortest time was the art of rapport, where you basically build rapport with somebody else, good, bad, or indifferent. You know, that could be somebody who is in a sad situation or an angry situation or a loving situation. And I was trying to build rapport with this other person, even though he wasn't there. I was trying to understand rapportfully what must his map of the world be like? What must it be like for him? And how is he coming to that conclusion? And is there some information that I can give him that would be helpful to him? Which I you know, even now, and it took, funnily enough, it took nearly 10 years after this guy thought that it was me that had contributed to his situation. It took 10 years before he realized who the real person was.
Wow.
It wasn't, and then, you know, it wasn't, he knows it wasn't me in any way, shape, or form. But it took 10 years for him to realize that. And it was quite an eye-opener to not feel smug, because I wasn't sort of thinking, see, I told you. It was a case of, well, I knew all the time it wasn't me. But I felt sorry for him, because I knew that whilst his attention was focused on me, the person who really had caused his problem, or should I say, contributed to him being arrested, was still in his close circle of friends, and he had no idea who it was. And I felt sorry for him that he was trusting somebody who was stabbing him in the back. And of course, none of, you know, I didn't know who it was, you know, so you know, I couldn't help him by telling him that. But I just did. I noticed that, you know, here I am being accused of something, and here I am feeling sorry for him. So,
but there's so many things on a therapeutic level in that, you know, that if a client comes to you and they say they've been accused of something and they haven't done it, like you say, you can spend your time trying to, you know, rationalize, explain, give evidence, get caught in that scenario, and really want that person to see in a different way. And I think sometimes that's the crux of difficulties in relationships, isn't it? Is you want the person to see you in the way that they're not seeing you, the things that you're being accused in, and whatever that is. And they can be patterns that people get stuck in. And in a way, you was able to not climb out of a pan, just not connect with it, even if it had been there before. It was really about being able to step out of that in a very different way. And that's what I always loved about both the hypnotherapy that I learned and the NLP, was how empowering that was, because all of a sudden it's very hard not to be responsible for yourself. At some point you have to go, okay, is all of the issues, so-called issues that I'm dealing with, related to me in the way that I perceive the world? And are people actors in that process? And how do I want to change the show, you know, and what it is unfolding? And simply, does it cause me pain, or does it cause me joy? You know, and it's that bittersweet. And how do I? And then the third angle, you know, on a spiritual level, is you come out of that polarity completely, and you just look at the world as it is. And 10 years is a long time, isn't it? And like you said,
and it's interesting because, you know, the guy is a lovely guy. You know, it was just a horrible situation for him to be going through. You know, whether he was deserving of being arrested or not is irrelevant. You know, it's not about accusing him of being innocent or guilty or anything. It was just the fact that he'd gone through that process and assumed straight away that it was me, and all I wanted to do was to help him.
Yeah.
What I sort of grew into understanding was people have their patterns of behavior that they go back to when, you know, the crap hits the fan, if you like.
Yeah.
And they don't have this flexibility or these skills at being able to understand and rationalize what's really going on. They just act emotionally. And here I was not doing that any longer. I wasn't blaming him or blaming somebody else or trying to accuse someone or saying it wasn't me. I just thought, I mean, I did actually say to him, oh, yeah, well, it wasn't me, but I just said it as matter of factly. But it did make me understand and learn a lot about myself at that point, as much as learning about, you know, the other people as well. And interestingly, the person who was responsible for him being arrested, I bumped into that person a few years later, before I knew it was this person who was responsible. And I bumped into this person whilst I was doing one of my other passions, which is photography. I was photographing a wedding, and I noticed this person at a distance who was very hesitantly walking towards me. And this person said, oh, I didn't know whether to approach you because I didn't know whether you'd be angry at me. And I thought, what would I be angry with you for? I still not knowing that this person was the person that had, if you like, allowed me to be the person to take the blame. But it was fascinating that this person had such a guilty conscience that they thought that I was going to be angry with them. And I thought, I've got no idea what you're angry, why you think I'm angry at all. And
so that's the process of detachment in a way, isn't it? You know, you didn't get caught into it.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I wasn't buying into it. You know, I wasn't carrying the label of being this, that, or the other. I was just like, if you've got an issue, then that's your issue. You know, how can I help you with it, sort of thing. So that's how I think that NLP gave me a fantastic foundation to be able to be a better person, for me to be happier in myself. And it also gave me some really key skills professionally too. And I didn't really ever use them from a sales point of view, but I suppose one of the things that you could say it helped with any sales that I may have had some influence in was just my ability to connect with people. And of course, people buy things from people. And I noticed, you know, I had a temporary job after I left the airline and before I became a therapist full time. There was a very slight period of time in between whilst I was deciding what to do. And so I was one of these canvassers in the high street. And I noticed that I was getting better results than some of the professional salespeople. And some of these professional salespeople have been doing it for years, couldn't understand why none of my deals fell through, even though they may have done a lot more deals, a lot more of theirs fell through, but hardly any of mine cancelled. And that's because I connected with these people and built rapport with them, so that it was bringing up a level of trust that the salespeople couldn't match, you know, because they were too salesy. Whereas I was just being genuinely interested in, is the product that I'm trying to introduce you to, is it actually going to be of a benefit to you? If it's not, there's no point. And so I didn't have hardly any cancellations from that point of view. So I actually did better. So it can help in sales, not from a teach you how to bullshit your way through to make a sale, but actually just genuinely connect with somebody and see, does this person require the product? Is it going to be a benefit to them? And if so, how can I help them to make the decision that's best for them? And that is, I think, one of the key things that makes a salesperson a good salesperson.
Yeah, it's that fine line of integrity, isn't it? You know, that if you've learned, and they can be very powerful tools that can help you build up rapport, get to know people really quickly, build up that connection. I think that's why in some circles NLP had a bit of a bad rap, really, is because they have been used. So you can see some of the techniques being used in business now. I mean, I think it's just part and parcel of some training sessions. But when you use it as part of creating a therapeutic process, one of the things, if you've ever come across Qora, there's a lot of different spaces dedicated to people who've either are going to a particular therapy or all therapy. Is the one thing that anyone that's I've worked that's worked for me, that works with clients, or where I've worked with clients, is looking for, is they want to be heard. They want to feel listened to. They want to feel
validated
understood and validated. And no matter what the issue is or what we call the problem, it's the core components of what most human beings are looking for. And we talked, in the past about, there are lots of different approaches out there, but like I said to you, sometimes only being a listening ear and validating and creating a space for somebody to feel safe and heard and share things that maybe they've not told with anyone before is really important. However, some people do need a bit of a nudge. They've got to a place in their life where, as they say, if you keep doing the same thing, what's that phrase? You keep doing.
If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got.
Yeah. And they get stuck and they don't know a way forward, and sometimes need to get beyond who they think they are, because often we're a product of our conditioning, of our childhoods, of our of what society said is okay for you as a man, as a woman, as a child, as an adult. And so the process of learning that, like you say, in particular, can be really beneficial. I got so much out of it. And I worked in schools initially. I worked with parents, and often that was around the communication they had, vice versa, with the children. But I was working with a lot of teenagers. And if you work as a counsellor and you go into school and you sit there and you're waiting for someone to talk, you're going to be sat there waiting a long time. So you need sometimes a range of tools that would just facilitate a dialogue, so that they knew whatever they came out with, whatever they said was relevant or not relevant, you just utilize some tools to give them to take back into the classroom, to take back home, because some of those young people, their family life was not going to change. So in a way, what you were doing was skilling them up to make them more resilient, to manage the circumstances they were in, and maybe not get attached, maybe not got drawn in, and not create these patterns, because that's when the patterns were either getting formulated or created even further. So
because people tend to have a problem when they feel that they've run out of choices of what behaviors they can use in a situation. If you're giving them a few different tools, you're teaching them how to be flexible themselves when the need arises. And it's, you run out of those options, that's when you've got a problem.
So in terms of the clients you've come into contact with, because I know that you went on and learned a whole range of other things, and it'd be great to hear about a bit more of that in a moment. What are the kind of tools that you felt, because once you got the rapport and someone's in the room with you, what are the kind of tools that you felt that you just was in your toolbox all the time, that you pulled out and just seemed to be effective?
It's interesting because I sort of integrated things into myself, so much so that I don't think of them as being tools anymore. It's part of who I am as a person. But I think one of the most effective things is an NLP technique called pattern interrupt, where somebody might be in deep depression, or they might be in mad panic and anxiety, or they might be really angry or something, and being able to interrupt that pattern that's going on in their mind momentarily breaks the pattern of behavior, so that you can interject and then choose a different path. A little bit like if, the old-fashioned days where you have an LP on a record player and it would spin around and you put the stylus on it and you'd listen to it and have a little bop. But if you accidentally scratched the record would never play the same way again.
Right.
And pattern interrupts are a bit like that. So somebody might be going, oh, I can't cope. And all of a sudden you say, oh, I've noticed you've got red shoes on. And they'll say, what? What's my red shoes got to do with it? And at that moment, you've interrupted their flow.
Yeah.
And you can then say, okay, right, well, let's choose to do something different or go here, there, and everywhere or whatever. But basically, and then you say, oh, sorry, you were doing your thing. Can you go back to being the anxious person again? And they go, what? And
then it's
so,
hard to pull it back.
yeah, so it's like, you know, if you're having a conversation with somebody and somebody interrupts you, you're thinking, what was I talking about?
Yeah.
And those little pattern interrupts, it's just a little throwaway comment sometimes, but it's enough to just sort of jolt somebody out of a stuck moment, you know, they might be stuck in depression or stuck in anxiety or stuck in anger or whatever. So I think that's probably the thing where if somebody is really getting into the flow of being upset and they can't seem to get themselves out of it, is to and I'll give you a little story, if I may. I remember a lady came to me once, and this is I suppose the story is illustrating the power of the pattern of interrupt, rather than reducing what she came to me for as being insignificant, because that is not the point at all. This lady came to me with a significant problem where she had been attacked. I won't go into any of the details or anything like that, but let's just say that it was a traumatic experience for her. And every time we even tried to approach the subject of what she wanted to resolve, she would just go into a ball of tears. And I had this little rubber gadget that when you squeeze it in your hand, it sounds like you're passing wind. And I don't know what on earth came over me to think of using that, but I just remember being in the therapy room, and she was inconsolable every time we went into this, you know, even before getting to the real traumatic aspect of it. But every time she even thought about talking about it, she would burst into tears. And very long story short, I said to her, okay, tell me this story from the beginning. And in my head, I thought, right, as soon as I notice any sort of waver in her emotional state from being a calm person, whether the emotion goes up or goes down, I'll pattern interrupt. And so I had this little rubber thing down near my pocket, and she couldn't see what I was doing, but she started to talk about something. And at the moment I detected that she was about to get upset, I just squeezed this little rubber thing and it went, and she just looked at me and I went, I'm so sorry. I said, I don't know what I'm really apologize. I'm totally unprofessional. I do apologize. Please go back and start again. So she went back to the beginning of the story. And what was fascinating, she got to the same point in the story where I'd broken the pattern. Now she went past that point, still no emotion. And she went a little bit further and a little bit further. And then, of course, some emotion came in. So I squeezed this thing again, and I just looked at her, pan-faced, and she looked at me, and the look she had this time, it was a look of disgust. She went, as if, how dare you, how rude. And I'm really sorry, I don't know what I've eaten. Anyway, I said, sorry, this is really important. Go back to the beginning and start again. I want to hear all of it. So she went back to the beginning. She went past the first point where she had an emotion with no emotion. She went past the second point in the story where she had emotion and still had no emotion. She got to the third point, and as soon as the emotion started, I squeezed this thing again. And she looked at me, and there was a little smirk on the corner of her mouth, as if to say, this is actually getting ridiculous now.
Right.
And then I said, and again, I protested innocence. I said, I'm really embarrassed. I said, this has never happened before. I'm really sorry. Go back and start again. And again, she went through each of the points where previously she'd been upset. And she went straight past that point with no emotion on each of those now 4 occasions. She then got to where she was describing the moment of being attacked. And again, I fired this thing off. And of course, and there was another sound of, you know, passing wind or whatever. And she started laughing uncontrollably. And she was trying to describe this moment of trauma while she was laughing. And I was laughing with her, not at her, but with her. And we both had tears rolling down our face. And I said, no, I'm sorry, this is really important. You must go back to the beginning. And she was crying even more. Oh my God. In the end, you know, when you're laughing and you can't breathe, it's so funny. That's where we were. And at this point, I then pulled the gadget out and I showed it to her. And I said, I wasn't really passing wind. I was doing this. Well, that was it. She was screaming the place down with laughter. The funniest thing she thinks she's ever seen before. And I said, right, transparent now, no gadgets, nothing. Actually tell me the story. And well, do you know what? She could not tell me any part of the story without it making her laugh, really, really laugh. And so there was no traumatic experience from what she'd experienced before. Whenever she thought of it, it was just like uncontrollable anger and upset and trauma and all those things. And now it was just sheer laughter all the way through. So we changed the subject, went on to something else with no emotion at all, just general chit chat, this, that, and the other. And I just said, look, I'm just want to make sure how you're feeling about it. You know, and because all the laughter had gone at this point. And she went back and then she told me the story. She went through the whole thing and she told me exactly what happened and how she was being attacked, this and the other. And she just said it all matter of factly. She said, yeah, it's just one of those things that happened, you know. She goes, I feel nothing about it. She goes, it's a situation which obviously I wouldn't like to happen again. She said, but no, she goes, I don't feel any upset, no trauma, nothing. And I thought all of that was purely down to the power of the pattern interrupt, nothing else. It was just interrupting a moment of uncontrollable emotion by breaking that pattern.
Yeah.
And that was it. So there was no validation. There was nothing to say, yes, you deserve to this and the other. Now, I understand that some people might be listening to this afterwards and thinking, well, that was a bit of a risk and that was a bit unprofessional.
It was a bit of a risk.
And I have to say that the reason that I did it was because I just sort of had a gut reaction.
Right.
That on this occasion, because of the way that she'd been speaking up until we'd even started doing it, I realized she was stuck in a pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
And it was that pattern of behavior that I, as a therapist, needed to help her break. But you can't tell somebody to break it. You've got to actually break it without them being consciously aware of it.
Yeah.
And then explain it afterwards by all means.
Yeah.
So, and I do remember another example of something like that, where Tony Robbins himself was filmed talking to a guy that was suicidal. And this guy, he honestly wanted to end his life. And if he could have ended his life there and then, he would have done. And I remember Anthony Robbins just did a pattern interrupt with him. And it was, you know, and he did something which was totally unexpected. You know, he made fun of something that this guy was wearing. And the guy was sort of, you could see that there was this construct in his brain was just going, what did you, hang on a minute, I'm supposed to, please feel sorry for me, I want to die. And here you are making fun of something. And you could see that there was this disconnect in his, he could not understand, why are you talking about something about what I'm wearing? And all of a sudden, that was just, that moment was enough to open the door for Anthony Robbins to come in with a little bit of humor about something. And it just changed this guy's life. Now, maybe people might be thinking, you're trying to oversimplify something and take away the importance of it. No, not at all. It was recognizing where somebody is stuck in a pattern of behavior and breaking it. And I think the key thing about any therapist is, how flexible is that therapist? How flexible is that therapist by enabling your client to come out of a problem state?
Yeah.
Because when you're in a problem state, you can't fix the problem with a problem state. You've got to come out of it, even momentarily, to be able to see the wood for the trees. And that's all the pattern interrupt was doing at this point. And it wasn't something that I could plan in advance. You know, I wasn't thinking, oh, when this lady comes in and tells me about her trauma, I'm going to start farting. It wasn't something that I could think of in advance. It was just my thinking on the fly, if you like. I was just making it up as I went along. Because when you are trusting your own intuition, that you have the tools, you have the rapport, just use them. And if for whatever reason, if I'd have gauged that her response was not what I was expecting or anything at all, it wouldn't have carried on. I wouldn't have carried on doing those things. So it wasn't, in some respects, as risky as what it actually would seem to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's two things I just wanted to highlight, Steve, because when I originally trained as a therapist, we were under the training model back then, and I think it's still the same for a lot of people. It's changing now that CBT has sort of taken a bit of a hold in the UK. That people were expected to come and sit with you, and you might work with them for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. The average back then that we were allowed to offer was 12 weeks. And part of what never sat with me was that if somebody's in the mire and they're coming to you and they're in deep distress, they're depressed, they're anxious, they feel like their life's fallen apart, and you get the worried well, which life's sort of okay, but there's something that's going on that bothers them, they don't sleep, or maybe they're drinking more, is it didn't feel right to me to sit there and just witness somebody doing that. There is something about, yes, definitely hearing somebody building up rapport and having integrity. There's also that aspect of all that training that you get, the toolbox, like you say, becomes integrated and it's there. And the wisdom is when you bring knowledge and skills and experience all together so that your system knows maybe what will work on a deeper level with that client. And that's the thing about some of the approaches, is transformation is possible. But I have managed clinicians over the last 15 years or even longer, and I've worked with a lot of clinicians, and they have a belief. And one of the things I used to say in my team, I had about 6 clinicians at this one particular time period. I said to them, if they're working with a client, we would always do 3 sessions, getting to know you, finding out what's going on. But within the first session, what can they go away with today that will make them feel more hopeful, more empowered? Is it a tool? Is it a technique? Is it a book? What is it? They would come the second time to sort of review how the week's gone and how they've implemented some of the things they've tried. And all my therapists all have different background. But if the therapist wanted to carry on working with them because they hypothesize they've got X problem, this problem, that problem, I say, okay, so how many sessions do you think that will take? And one of the things I learned in NLP is our expectations of people is very powerful. And if we expect that person's going to be depressed and anxious for the rest of their life based on the information that they've got, that we're going to convey that. Now, it may not be that they stay there, because it might come across somebody else that challenges that thinking. And the one thing I notice around, because I've experienced depression myself in the past, is it is a locked in state of mind. And one of the beautiful aspects of the research coming through now, there's somebody called Andrew Huberman, American, that is a neuroscientist. And he actually looks at what's happening with the patterning in the brain and which parts of the brain is being lit up when that person is reaccessing the same pattern. And depression and anxiety, or any of these states that are really powerful, are just patterns that have been walked down. It's that same street you walk down every day that's been reaffirmed. And you're right, is sometimes people, if you said, I've got this technique to try with you, and it may just turn things around and you walk out of here feeling great, high proportion of people I'm coming into contact with will probably look at you and go, no, you're crazy, that won't happen. So in a way, you've got to do things intuitively, but as stealthily, because the brain's not waiting for that thing to happen. The potential is there. And there are other clients that you can come into contact with that maybe There's a range of different things that are all connected, and sometimes you've resolved one and it wasn't really about that, you find out it's something else. So there's a lot of things at play, that the expectations of the client when they seek support, the expectations of the person who's trained in people and their capacity to grow, and whether we look at people, and certainly in the work that I've done for local authorities and NHS, through an illness model, a deficit model, or a potential positive model. And at the moment, what we're seeing, and this is why I've sort of been talking about things in terms of bridging, what we're seeing is we've got the old model, which is there's something wrong with you that we need to fix, and I can fix it. I don't think you can fix it. And we've got the positive psychology, the wellness model, the things that you can do for yourself on your own journey, and that's around your core beliefs, your ideas and your attitudes. And that's where NLP sort of goes deeper, doesn't it? It looks at that foundation of that.
It's looking at this, yeah, it's looking at the structure, not the sort of academic description of it. It's functionally, on a day-to-day basis, how do you produce the result that you've got at the moment, and does it match what you want? So, even down to, you've just taken a slip of your drink that you had in a glass there. How did you didn't think, oh, let's not analyze to the nth degree whether, how do you know you were thirsty, this, that and the other is.
Yeah.
How did you actually get to that outcome? Is, well, I was thirsty, it got to the point where blah blah blah, and so you sort of looking at the structure. Well, that's the same with regards to being broken. I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, this, that and the other. It is no different to making a decision to have a glass of water than it is to jump off a bridge. It's just, there's a structure of thinking processes that you go through. Now, it may well be that some people are just acting kinesthetically, so they're just noticing there's a difference in the way that the body feels. It might be an auditory thing where somebody is berating themselves. Well, whose voice is it that they're hearing? Are they berating themselves in their own voice? What tone is it? And if you can do something simply like just be aware of that, and change that internal voice to something which has got a different tone to it, all of a sudden you get a different outcome. So there's lots of instant things that you can do, which a lot of people will think, is that it? Well, yeah. Sometimes it is that it. You don't have to go to therapy for 12 weeks or 12 months or this, that and the other. Sometimes you're only in and out in 12 minutes. Now, I'm not
I think that was your rate, wasn't it? And yours was usually one session.
Usually I would see people for one session, sometimes two, because we'd figure out, well, what do you want to be able to do that you can't at the moment?
Yeah.
Well, I want to be able to talk about this without getting upset. Okay. How do you get upset? And they said, what do you mean, how do you get upset? Well, how does it upset you? Well, and all of a sudden I'm looking at that person's body language, their eye movements, the skin color, their breathing rate. I'm looking at all of that as a package of behaviors or thought processes or structure of how somebody produces being upset. And it may well be that there is one tiny piece of information within that, which might be the way they listen to their own internal voice. Just change that. And all of a sudden, the whole structure of the whole upset thing can't be reproduced, just like you've scratched a record. So
just to let people know that clearly we've known each other a long time, and I don't know if you remember this, Steve, because I'm not sure I saw you after this, is that I came to you once for I think it was hypnotherapy and NLP session, because I had a fear of heights for years. And I was booking a trip. I was going through France and Italy. And when I looked at the trip itinerary that I wanted to do, that involved me going to the most beautiful place that in that whole, trip itinerary. But that meant driving on the edges of the cliffs around the Amalfi Coast. So I thought, I know Steve, I'm going to go and see him. And I came and had a session with you. And I said, I'm not sure if it's going to wipe it away completely. I knew it was possible, but I'd lived with it for so long. And sometimes we do live with something for a long time until something comes in front of us, and we have to find either a way through it or transform that, or get rid of it completely. So I was open-minded, and I think that was a thing, and I knew the power of this work. And it was the first time I was going to go abroad on my own and travel from place to place. So I had all sorts of anxieties, because I can be a really confident person, but like a lot of people, I can have these fears that just pop up every time I think I'm going to take that flight, or I'm going to go this place, that place, staying in Airbnb. But the biggest one was around the trip around the Amalfi Coast, because I knew what I wanted to take a tour as well. Anyway, so I went from France, and I went through different parts of France, starting off in Nice, ended up in Italy, Genoa, went to Rome, went to the Cinque Terre region, and got to the Amalfi Coast and thought, right, I'm going to book a trip. I'd seen the buses that were taking that route around the Amalfi Coast. I thought, how on earth are they driving them? Because it looked like the front of the bus would be over the edge all the time. So I chose to get a minibus, and got in there, and the moment I totally forgot that I might have had some issues with height until I was on the minibus, and I thought it's a bit too late now. But what was interesting is I was sat on the seat that looks over the edge, and I got quite far and I felt okay. But what started to happen is there was a woman who was sat in front of me who started to make some very strange noises. She came to the back of the bus, curled in a ball, and sat screaming. And my whole trip was now doing some panic, bringing her down from the panic and the stress, because she was scared of heights and I didn't realise it, didn't know her, and was now talking her through this trip on the Amalfi Coast. So there were sort of two things that took place: is the work that I had with you when I went and did that, and I've been across bridges. I still get the occasional little twang sometimes, my brain registers, but the Amalfi Coast, it's very high up and it's very sheer drops. And I think there was also a massive pattern interrupt happening at the same time, because I spent so much time supporting her to get round there, and then keeping her friends quiet, because I was like, don't disturb her, I've just got to calm, while we're on there, wondering whether to apply some strategies, because I was in a small space and she might have told me where to go. But it was a really interesting experience, and I know the power of hypnotherapy and NLP, and I think you've done those kind of things for a few other people as well.
Oh yeah, I think it was over 20 years as a full-time therapist. I mean, I can't remember how many different modalities I've learned over the years. I've probably forgotten more than most people have ever learned. But hypnotherapy is one, emotional freedom techniques, emo trance, 3D mind, lots of different energy psychology modalities adding on, with regards to hypnotherapy as well, kinetic shift. I did professional kinesiology. What else have I done? I think the thing that I've did most recently was future life progression.
Okay.
Which is very good. That's enabling you to be guided through to your future self, if you like, in a different life or within this life, or you can actually go to alternate versions of yourself, and that can also be in the past as well. So it's a little bit like, some people have past life regression. Well, this is the same as that, but in the past or the future or the present, or an alternate of each of them. And those are really quite powerful, because it enables you to understand that where you are now is not the end of the journey, and it can equip you with knowledge that you weren't necessarily aware that you have at a cellular level.
Interesting.
If you agree to past lives and future lives, this, that, and the other. So that's probably the thing that I've learned most recently, which is really, really interesting. But yeah, so I've probably did all the lots of weight loss and stop smoking and phobias and all those things. And those things, to me, it's not about seeing people for this, that, and the other. It's just seeing people people are really lovely, interesting things, you know, that they carry around a big sack full of problems that they've had for years, that I think nobody else is ever going to understand me. Well,
Yeah.
To be honest, most people have got the same things, but it all comes down to being able to resolve this problem and function, or they can't. And so somebody who is a multi-skilled, multi-modality therapist, if you like, hasn't just got like, oh, I just do NLP, or I just do hypnotherapy, or I just do this. It's a case of you go in with a thought process of, isn't this fascinating that this person is producing a result, and we're going to see if together we can get that person to create a different result, one that's more empowering for them. And it doesn't matter what the problem is, you know, that could be something, you know, majorly traumatic, you know, that somebody has had some sort of post-traumatic stress in a war zone, or it might just be that somebody frightened them bursting a crisp bag behind their ear when they were a child. Trauma is a very individual thing for every individual person. And us as therapists, we're just there to facilitate change where possible, so somebody feels more equipped to be able to deal with those situations in their present. And
that's where, no matter what way I used to work and the way that you work now, is it's that key aspect of whenever we met someone is, where are you right now? Because people come with gifts and skills, and what's getting in the way of your functioning. The way that we looked at it as a service is what's interfering in their function and capacity to be a parent, to be an adult, to work. Because that's where I used to help people understand that's the difference between having a mental health issue and having some mental health concerns or well-being concerns. It's the capacity to function. So if you're sleeping well, if you're eating fairly well and good nutrition, you have some friendships or connections, maybe a hobby that you like, and you're able to manage those different aspects of your life. It may be that something's come up, or you've got an interview, or you want a life change or something, and you'll go and see someone, in comparison to people who would come through our service, which would either be suicidal, self-harm, or there's a lot of depression and anxiety around. And that is often because they don't perceive that they've got the tools or the capacity to feel anything otherwise. And why I was really passionate of working with teenagers, young people, was it was catching them before any of these problematic patterns and behaviors got really embedded. Because sometimes if you keep trying to do something and you haven't got the tools to do that, to manage, and that could be manage your schoolwork, manage relationships with your teacher, play a good game of soccer or cricket or whatever, is on a deeper level. I've seen the impact that has, that affects their self-esteem, their core sense of self. Then you're sometimes working with something quite different, and so they need to experience one or two things that goes against what is now getting an embedded sense of who they are, and then getting them to think about who they are in the future, because kids are told a lot of the time by teachers, you're not going to be any good unless you get your 5 A to C's, and this happens and that happens. It's so fundamental at that time because they're so heavily influenced by their friends. And
identity is everything. I remember going back to Tony Robbins again, I keep on referring to him because I suppose he, as a person, taught me more than a lot of people that I've, worked with in the past. But he was talking about a lady who was a school teacher. She was one of these fill-in teachers when she would go in when somebody was off sick or something. And she'd been given the register for a class of people that she was looking after while somebody else had gone off sick with anxiety, another teacher or something. And she noticed on the register that each of the kids in the class also, it had their IQ next to it. And it was really, she found it was absolutely fascinating that this school that she'd just, for the first time she turned up to, they'd just given her the register, and next to every kid was their IQ, this, and she thought, this is amazing, what a fantastic school. So she went through and did the register and noticed that this, a lady called, a kid called Mel might have had an IQ of 102, and another one further down had an IQ of 115 or something. So she thought, right, well, I really need to up my game now. And she was teaching this class of children according to their higher level of intellect than what she was expecting. And at the end of the week, it was the end of that term. So she was just collecting a few of her bits and pieces, thinking that she was only there for that week. So she's put them in a box. And as she was walking out to the car park, the headmaster come running out and said, I noticed that you're taking all your stuff. Where are you going? She goes, well, I've done the week that I thought I was doing, so I presume you don't need me anymore. And he said, are you joking? You're one of the best teachers we've ever had. And she said, what? He said, you've turned around. The reason that you were looking after that class is because every teacher that we've had look after that class in the past has gone off sick with anxiety because they can't control this group of people. They're all delinquents. And she said, what are you talking about? They're all really intelligent. And he said, but this is the class where anyone who's stupid and all these troublemakers, they all go to this one class and that's it. She said, but they're all so clever. They've all got such high IQs. And he said, where did you get that? She said, next to the register of every person's name has got their IQ number. He said, that's their locker number. She honestly, and apparently this was a true story.
Yeah.
And so she was teaching them, assuming that they were intelligent kids, and they were responding to her. And this comes down to this thing about identity, because we act according to who we think we are.
Yeah.
And if you as an individual think that you're stupid, your outcomes are going to be vastly limited compared to if you think that you're a clever person, or a capable person, or anything this and the other. And I love that story because it really did highlight how if you treat people as if they're stupid, you're going to be proved right. If you treat people as though they are special human beings who are enormously clever in their own way, you're going to be proved right. And I think that's also with, when you're a therapist, people coming in, if this person is trying to convince you they're broken, then you've got a bit more work to do than if somebody comes in and says, I'm not broken, I just don't know how to resolve this issue. I don't know how to resolve this phobia, or I don't know how to resolve this anxiety. And, I've many times people have come in and I've shown them, and I've actually said to them, you're not broken. You just don't know how to deal with this situation. And I show them how to deal with it. And they go, oh, well, that's very interesting. And that's even people with post-traumatic stress. I've had people from different special forces and, the services, police, fire and ambulance. And I've had a few GPs and this and the other who've come to me with post-traumatic stress, thinking that that's it. They've got this disorder. And of course they haven't.
So just while I plug in my laptop, bear with me a sec. It's interesting what you say, because identity is definitely a huge thing. And you reminded me, it's a conversation I've had many times, and it's probably maybe why I, by default, fluke, ended up working in schools, because most of my career since I retrained as a therapist has just sort of happened. But I got to about 14 at secondary school. I was in school in Manchester and grew up in a poor working class family, single parent, and it was quite unusual at the time. So I'm talking about the sort of early 80s, when I was now a teenager in school. And for some reason, I got to about 14, but I think I was like a lot of kids in working class families where education was viewed a little bit differently. I got a bit disenchanted, and I struggled in some of the lessons, and I could feel that I was struggling. I started to get this sense of just not being able to make sense of what the teacher was saying. And I did approach the teacher a few times, but quite quickly worked out that they weren't interested. So I did what a lot of kids did at that time anyway. I barely went to school between 14 and 16. I've still got my school reports, and I was an A-star student. But I had this perception that I was stupid and I couldn't do stuff.
Mm.
And because I couldn't understand what was going on, I could see what was going on around me, and I just got stuck in that. And it marred me to some degree, because I've always, in my career, I got into jobs that actually the subjects that I loved at school, and I did go to the subjects with the teachers that I liked. So I came out with 3 CSEs at the time. But as I got into this world and retrained, and it was about the same time as you, I think I was halfway through the training in 97, came out with the qualification in 99. Is through that training I realized a lot about myself. And when I went into school, I think I went in knowing that my perception about myself was clearly wrong. I'd managed to get through a course and actually ended up writing really good essays, and went on to do an MA and surprised myself in the process. And I think that was the thing that I found quite sad, is that there is a lot of people walking around with this idea of who they think they are, what they're capable or not capable of doing, or that they're stupid. And and so many people I've come into contact with have that idea about themselves, and it's just not true. And sometimes, like you say, it can be more of a challenge to work with somebody like that, because by the time, and in particular in the mental health field, and the colleague and I talk about this quite a lot, because she's now working in for adult mental health back in secondary care, which is with clients who've been known a long time. And because doctors and psychiatrists, and they've not responded to treatment, and this hasn't worked and that hasn't worked, they've now got this identity that they are just someone who's got mental illness, and they won't really ever function in society again. And I've seen some of the work that she does, and 1 or 2 meetings with her, because sometimes there's just something about the person you come into contact with that you can just transform in their presence. And we're going a bit deep here, that outside of the models, there's a spiritual connection that is taking place in the room. And I remember reading about Carl Rogers at the time, who was the force in the therapeutic movement from the 60s, 70s and 80s. And he at that time was talking about mirror neurons, that you get a client who comes into the room, and you may match them to start with, but then what you're doing is, in NLP terms, if you're matching, mirroring, and then you're leading, moving them to the new land almost, that maybe the brain can't comprehend. But if they allow themselves just be a little bit open and receptive, if they feel okay in that session with that person, like what you're saying, you build up that trust and that rapport. There's so many wonderful, beautiful, magical things that can happen. And that's partly why I've wanted to have conversations with different practitioners, because this work's going on all the time. And I've had one foot in that world and one foot in the NHS and local authority world, where there's a limited level of support available if you haven't got the financial means, and you have to take whatever, if you're lucky, is on offer. It's a postcode lottery, and yet there's so many things that people can do for themselves. So
the problem I find with those is you as a patient or client or whatever, you have to fit into the therapists who you're working into their model of the world. Like the NHS, you can go and have some CBT. Well, what qualifies the doctor that's recommended you to go and have CBT? What qualifies that doctor to know that only CBT can help you?
The only thing, yeah.
And you think it's very limited and very frustrating for people to have to go along and go and see a therapist, which they're not going to be suited for that person possibly anyway.
Yeah.
And it's quite sad, really, especially when I've had GPs come to see me. I used to go to Wexham Park Hospital, which there's an element there of teaching that goes on with regards to doctors and new registrars, this, that, and the other. And I was invited on a number of occasions to go there to add to their teaching days for different therapies, so that they could be aware of, there is CBT available, there's NLP available, there are the bioresonance scanner machines I use, those available. But I do remember, depending on the don't know how to describe it, but there were days where I went in where some of those doctors were fascinated and absolutely open to, all these different modalities. But I remember on one occasion where I just knew that this group of doctors that I was talking to, that I was giving this lecture to, none of them were listening to me. And I just thought, this is fascinating. There's a group, I can't remember how many were, but there might have been about 8 or 9 doctors all in this little classroom, if you like. And I noticed that every single one of them, without fail, was distracted and they weren't listening to me. And I'd never had that before, ever. I've never gone into talking to a group of people and not had one person want to listen to what I've got to say. And the guy who regularly used to invite me there was their instructor. He was busy writing something because he'd heard me give this talk on a number of occasions, and I just noticed nobody was listening to me. So I thought, well, there's no point me talking then. So I just stopped mid-sentence. I just stopped and I just looked and I thought, I'm just going to see if anybody looks up. And not one of them looked up, none of them. And I just stood there and I just looked, smiling. And I thought, the first person to look up will see that I'm smiling. And of course, nobody did. And of course, the instructor chap, he said, oh, Steve, why have you stopped? And I just said, nobody's listening. Not one person. And it's the first time I've seen a group of doctors get absolutely hammered. He was really, really strong with it. He said, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bishop has come here out of his own. And I thought, I've never seen a doctor getting a bollocking before. It was unbelievable how closed-minded these people were. They just did not want to listen to an alternative view about what was possible. Absolutely fascinating. It's never happened before, never happened since. But I think that, if we go into as a therapist thinking that, the only thing that we can offer is the only thing that's going to fix that person, then we've lost. And those doctors, they would never have been able to help a patient of theirs to do anything other than what was in their blinkered view of the world as what's available.
Yeah, and I think it's something I've seen with the time that I've spent in the NHS, where we've done a lot of best practice events to try and open people's minds to the variations, really, because you can have an approach that's brilliant and has a lot of outcomes, but you can have a therapist that's trained in that approach that isn't actually that good with people, and vice versa. And there's certainly a trend in the UK. I've been seeing it since 2015. It started taking off properly since about 2018, where there's training courses in various universities now where people who've got psychology degrees can then go and train as a clinician in CBT, and it's aimed at young people who've got anxiety and depression. Now, I'm really happy to see that we're moving that way, as in opening up the idea that young people can go and talk to somebody and get some issues resolved. However, part of the findings already are that not all young people will respond to that way, that prescriptive approach, won't necessarily do the homework, it might not necessarily help. And sadly, what we end up, as a lot of adults and professionals do in the field, is we call this group of people the problem group, because my approach isn't working on them. So there are many models and many good therapists, and there are many therapists who maybe haven't quite found their niche or haven't quite found the client group that they can work with. But one thing that I always encourage people to think about, going back to your point earlier, is it's about working out maybe what do you need right now and who do you think can help, and tapping into your own intuition. Give it a go and see how you feel when you're in with that person. If you want to spend a lot of time talking about your issues, it may be that a traditional therapist at that time might help. If you want to get some resolution to things that are disturbing you, like PTSD, like trauma, like noise sensitivity, or any behavioral changes you want to make, then do you want to do that the faster way, or do you want to do that in the other way that may or may not work? So is there any advice you could give to anybody that might be looking, or anything that you're working on at the moment that people might like to find out more? Have you got a website that people can contact, or any information anywhere?
Well, my website is stevebishop.co.uk. There's some information on there about some of the different modalities that I use, but I think really it comes down to contacting me to find out whether I'm the right therapist for you, because it may well be that, you know, what's on my website, or knowing that I can do EFT or emo trance or hypnotherapy or FLP, for, you know, future life program, it may well be that I might have all the tools.
Yeah.
For some reason, we're just not the right fit for each other. And really only a chat on the phone, even for a few minutes, is going to ascertain whether we're going to be able to work with each other. And also that it doesn't cost anything, you know, to have a few minutes chat. But if the one thing that comes back to what you were saying right at the beginning about integrity, the one thing that I value in myself is the integrity to understand that I'm not the therapist for everyone, but I do know therapists that will pretty much cover everything for everyone at some point. So if I'm not the right person, then I know certain person over here would be ideal for you, because they're really into counseling. Even though counseling doesn't work for me, I know it's really valuable for other people. So I know somebody who's a really good counselor over there, somebody else who might be the right psychologist for somebody over there, or a psychiatrist, or this and the other. So, and I think it's knowing myself that I don't go out of my skill set. So if, for example, if somebody comes along with a complex problem, let's say schizophrenia or something like that, that is not within my skill set to deal with somebody who's got multiple personalities, but I know somebody who that is their field. So, you know, by all means, if somebody wants to have a quick chat with me, am I the right person for them? Be more than happy to have a chat, and then send them wherever they want if they need to.
I think just on that note, Stephen, it's great that people can do that they can contact you and have that chat. But in terms of mental health and well-being, or mental illness and mental health, is underlying many mental health conditions, whatever we call it, anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicidal, ideation, schizophrenia, psychosis, is stress. And that's what's come out in the research. And a lot of people who are struggling with issues as an adult have possibly had, I think, can't remember the numbers now, 3 out of 10, had some serious issues as they were growing up, had experienced what are called adverse life experiences. And that's where there's either been trauma in the family, drug and alcohol in the family, domestic abuse, violence, sexual abuse, really traumatized childhoods. And we have discovered a lot more about trauma isn't just for veterans who have been on the field. Trauma is a range of those experiences that people have had. But when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, what we're looking at is, if you've got 1 or 2, you might be functioning okay in the world, and you're managing your relationships, and you're doing the kind of things that you want. People who've had several and also have a negative worldview, have that inner voice that's really hypercritical, have poor self-esteem and identity, may have, like you say, more things that they want to work on. But fundamental to all of this is stress. And what I found when I was working with teenagers and with some of the adults, and I was working on a project for women who'd experienced domestic abuse, is when you came out of the situation that they'd been in, and we rewound a little bit, is they'd equally come from really stressful situations. And so what had happened is that they were in constant fight or flight. Their system was hyper aroused all the time. So it was about bringing the arousal down, but helping them understand the way the brain works, the way that their perception works, the way the filters, what they're doing when they're filtering, and building up that rapport, and also enabling them to trust their initial thought, their initial reaction. Because some people have watered that down so much through circumstances. So anybody that's listening to this, either themselves or somebody else that they know, are experiencing something that they're concerned about, we can go through the usual channels, go through the NHS, go to a doctor. If you don't want to be medicated, and I'm not pro-medication, I think there are occasions where it can be really valuable for that person because they have gone into massive stress, overwhelm, and overload, when someone's at that point, they do need a lot of assistance to help them, and should have access to the helplines where they can get some assistance from mental health charities, and don't suffer in silence. But understanding how they're experiencing the stress and reducing that and getting that, what you talked about in your very early example about emotional regulation, of bringing that down, if they can experience that with you, and find a way of tapping back into that, or even developing a safer place and safer states, then they will become more open, receptive. Even if you don't work with them, and other therapists don't, they can have a couple of sessions just to reduce that stress, because it's stress and overwhelm that tips people over the edge. And we've just had the holidays, which can be really stressful for people. But I just wanted, before we ended, for you to tell us about some of the other things you're involved with. You're going to come back and we're going to have some deeper conversations about those other bits of work that you do. I don't want to forget, how does Steve also look after his own well-being?
Well, I'd like to answer all of those, but my other half has just turned up outside and can't get in the door, and is just constantly pressing the doorbell. So you're talking about your own mental well-being. In my head, I'm thinking, stop ringing the bell.
Right, I'm going to put this on pause, and I'll see you in a moment.
Okay.
So, Steve, just as we were talking about stress and the impacts of that, you had something that you weren't expecting, and so your whole system went into stress and overwhelm.
So anyway, we were saying some of the different things that I do, which might be interesting for people, is the bioresonance scanning stuff that I do, which can be done remotely. Scalar energies, all different sorts of frequencies, this, that, and the other. And those are things which can help people physically and emotionally, where it's not necessarily having to be face to face. So, you don't have to be in the therapy room, so to speak. So that's a big session, chatting about that, because there's a lot to it. It scans people to be able to find out what sort of things are going on from a viral, bacterial, pathogenic, all those sorts of things, where you can understand what may be causing physical symptoms in somebody, but also how the emotions can play a part in that as well, where your emotions can be giving you physical symptoms, and where we can analyze your voice pattern, and the analysis of that voice pattern will tell you which emotions are causing you a problem right now, and then give you a set of musical tones to listen to, if you like, embedded in a musical track. And those frequency tones can balance out where there is an imbalance within your body. So we can go into all of that sort of thing as well.
It'd be really interesting to find out more about that, because it sort of sounds similar. I do a lot of sound healing, go to crystal sound baths, and there's about frequency and the influence of frequency on the body. So I look forward to that. And you were going to tell me about, how does Steve look after his own well-being?
In a number of different ways. Firstly, to make sure that you're fully hydrated. Believe it or not, if you're dehydrated, any stress is going to be worse for you than if you're hydrated. If you're dehydrated, you can have physical manifestations of ill health, like even just muscle fatigue, digestion issues, headaches, and all those things. And then those things themselves can add physically to what's going on emotionally and make you feel overwhelmed. So I think the very basic thing that you can do is to make sure that you drink plenty of water every day, but the right water. I make sure that my water is all filtered and it's all charged with the right energies, so that the cells in your body can absorb that water, and any trace minerals, of vitamins, or whatever it is that you're taking. If you've got good quality water, then your body will absorb it far better than if it's just poor quality water or tap
Yeah.
water or whatever, depending on where you are living in the country or in the world. And I also use my own scanning frequency machine. I use that on myself every single day to give me a snapshot, if you like, of my state of health physically and emotionally, so that I can take steps to avoid things that might be coming up. You know, it might be indicating that I've got some increased level of energy towards certain foods, and it can tell me where I might have some food allergies. Foods to avoid today, for example. You know, you may be a little bit overwhelmed with eating too much of something, and your body says, I need a bit of a rest from it. So the scanning machine is able to give you a complete rundown of everything that your body is ingesting, and showing you where it's a cause for concern. You know, sometimes days, months, weeks, or even years in advance of it causing a problem. So yeah, I use those pretty much every day.
And was there a story about an ice cream van before we finish?
Well, when I realized during the COVID era, lockdowns, this and the other, that I missed seeing people, because I used to see people face to face for therapy, this and the other. That was my main preferred way of dealing with people. I missed people, and of course when lockdown came along, it pretty much stopped all of that. So I thought, I need to find some other way of connecting with people. And one of the things that was still allowed was you know, the service of or delivery of food. So an uncle of mine had told me, I don't know, 30 years ago, he said, if you ever want to be looking at a successful business, then get yourself an ice cream van. So I bought a lovely, beautiful ice cream van, and it enabled me to go out and about and see people. And of course it was therapy for me, because I was able to see people who were happy to see me. They were smiling again. You know, and I was providing them with little treats or ice creams, this or the other, and you could just see that people's face would light up. And I thought, yeah, do you know what, sometimes you just need to see a smile. So yeah, that's my little hobby business on the side. Is I've got a beautiful ice cream van, which I really enjoy.
And it goes to show, doesn't it, is that we can put a smile on people's faces in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to be through therapy. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, but it is a big, you know, gives us joy as well as they feel joy. And there's nothing more magical than that. So thank you very much for your time today, Steve. We're going to put, when we post it up, access to your website so people can contact you and give you a call or send you a message.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Mel.
All right. Thank you.
See you.